you, and welcome everyone.
Hello, everybody who's joining. And where did my list go? We've got people just waiting at the doors, rolling in. Thank you for joining us today. This is Rich Peterson. I'm standing in as we're all in different locations. We'll have Carrie Zenz joining us shortly, but we want to get started letting you know what's going on as you join. Check out and find the chat button in your control panel. Could be floating around at the bottom, at the top. Just chat in there. Let us know where you're joining us from and how you're doing currently. We'll get going.
Thanks, Rich. And hi, everyone. This is Lisa Storts. I'm with Allen Interactions as well, and colleague of Rich's. Love seeing everyone joining. Thank you so much for making the time today. We're sure to have a nice, lively discussion. Ellen and Ethan have prepped a great dialogue, and it's just going to be very open and fun communication. So lots of people joining. Please just share in the chat window, as Rich mentioned, where you're from. We just love kind of gauging things, and we'll be following it closely on the back channel. You're going to hear me mention it many, many times today, but the learning never stops. And Alan, we're all very passionate about learning. That's why we've dedicated our careers to this. So today will be a great starter session for this, but we welcome ongoing questions even after this today. We're all here to help through this interesting time. So Doreen, North Carolina, great. Oh, I was going to have somebody, Ethan, or Ellen, I don't know if you have a map handy, but I wanted to track all the states, make sure we have all the states accounted for. Ethan, for those of you who may know him or have gone to his classes, often talks, he likes visiting all of the state capitals. And I think he's made it to all of them now. So
No, not quite yet. I don't have Hawaii or Alaska, and I think I've got 3 others I've got South Carolina, South Dakota, and Maine.
Oh,
remaining
okay.
on the mainland.
Perfect. Okay, so joining us, we have New York, Maryland, Ontario, welcome, North Raleigh, Boston, Minnesota, Ohio, California, Texas. I realize I'm mixing states and cities, who forever's catching that. Oslo, Norway, welcome.
And Germany and London, California.
I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, London. Stuttgart, Germany, welcome. North Carolina, fabulous. And happy spring, everyone. A lot of you are noting that it is spring, and please note where the sunshine is.
And welcome, Yusuf from Istanbul. Great to have you join us.
That's awesome. Chicago, New Zealand, Charlottesville.
I just was reading the coolest architecture article about these fantastically brightly colored apartment buildings in Istanbul. They're just very fetching. They looked almost,
Ooh.
they were just gorgeous.
If we had more time, Ethan, too, you could share your picture of Curacao with all those beautiful colored buildings in the background.
I don't have it handy, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Hi, Laura. Welcome. Seeing a lot of familiar names out there, which is always fun. Oh, snowy in Vermont. Beautiful. Good. We have about 3 more minutes. Boise, sunny, nice.
Jealous.
San Antonio, welcome. New Mexico, Qatar, welcome. This is fabulous. Yeah, seeing lots of very familiar names. Thank you, everyone, for spending the next hour with us. Chicago, perfect.
And for those of you who have been on a webinar of mine before, this Ethan, this is a debut of my new location. I just moved over the break of the year, and I'm in a brand new, well, a very old house, but it's new for me, and so the background looks different, I'm sure. No more of that chartreuse wallpaper. So I've got to liven this place up a bit, but this is my inaugural webinar out of my new house.
That's awesome. Sunny in Phoenix, great. Oh, India, welcome. California. Good. This is great to see all the locations. This is wonderful. Feel free to participants, feel free to be chatting with each other as well as we go through this. We are going to be monitoring the back channel very closely. If we don't get to your questions today, we will follow up on each and every one of them, rest assured. We are happy to do that.
Hey, just to make sure, some of you are doing this and others, by default, your messages go to just panelists. If you continue to chat, you might want to switch that little pop-up, and Rich will go over this in a minute, but change that to panelists and attendees so that everybody can see, because otherwise it's just the 5 of us that are seeing what you're entering.
Yeah, good reminder, Ethan. Hey, Carolyn, absolutely, we will be recording this and sending the recording out after. New Mexico, Seattle, Ohio, Georgia, perfect. Southern California, Dallas, Omaha, more Seattle, Milwaukee. Oh, Stephanie, I love it. So Stephanie is joining from Chicago in her home office that she's sharing with her daughter, who is pushing out assignments. That's awesome. Love it. All right, and we have about 1 minute, and then we're going to kick it. We're going to have Carrie kick it off.
I just want everyone to know that I'm also joined today by my dogs. They are under the desk. So if you have any questions for them, I'll try to pass it along.
Love it. Yeah, I was on a pretty serious call the other day, and all of a sudden this basset hound walks by in the background and kind of cast a whole new energy on it, which was very refreshing.
Well, my cats might join us, but they're in the doghouse, proverbial doghouse today. I had my corned beef and cabbage for St. Patrick's Day 1 day late. And so then I was upstairs working and I still had the pot on the stove before I put it away for the night. And so then I went down to pack it up and they had eaten they had picked out every bit of the corned beef out of the pot. So,
Bad
I just
kitties.
had cabbage and potatoes boiled in broth. But at any rate, I think they know they did wrong and now they're staying clear of me.
Oh, that's awesome. Great. Seattle, Oklahoma, New Hampshire, Virginia, Toronto, Los Angeles, Houston. Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And Carrie, I think we're at the top of the hour if you'd like to kick it off.
Can everyone hear me? Can everyone see the screen that says use the chat panel? Good, good, good. Everyone can see it. Great. And then just make sure if you're using your chat that you've switched it to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your comments. So that's how you do that on the screen. Select all panelists and attendees in the chat drop down. I think we've done all the introductory stuff. So that's great. And we're going to have some fun today because we all need a bright spot. So we're going to be doing the hashtag learning for real. So we really just want, we know a lot of us were working remotely and stuff. A lot of us have pets and cats and dogs, and we want to see them all. So share them on Twitter, use the hashtag, share your work from home helpers with us. And we're going to share that feed a little bit later. So kind of fun. It's fun seeing where all of you guys are from. I think I saw Pella, Iowa on there. I'm an Iowa native, so you guys make a lot of great windows there, right? So again, my name is Carrie Zenz. I am the Director of Marketing here at Allen Interactions. We're here to just learn and share together. It's tough times right now. We know the sun is shining brightly on all of us and our businesses, our work, our families, our personal life, and it's kind of like we have this temporary cloud and rain over us. And I found this image of this raccoon, and I'm not a big fan of raccoons, honestly, but I was like, how appropriate, because raccoons, they hibernate a lot and isolate, which I think we all can relate to right now. And they also typically don't like rain, and we're kind of have this heavy cloud of rain over us. And we are here for you. We are in this together. We just can't stress that enough. We all need to join together and make the best out of this. do great work when there's obstacles in our way. So this is really about getting out our umbrellas, our gear, and thriving during this rainstorm. And so, it's what tools and gadgets and things that we need, like rain boots and rain gauges and gutters, to persevere and to make this shift together. So we have some great people here with us today. I can't say enough about these people. I've worked with them for a long time, and I think the absolute world of them. Ethan Edwards is a senior instructional strategist here. He's also our Allen Academy Dean. So that's a new certification that we have that you can look into more on our website. Ellen Burns-Johnson, she's also involved in the Allen Academy, and they've both been doing e-learning design for a really long time, but they know a lot about learning and a lot about, they've lived the experience of going from face-to-face to virtual training. They do it a lot with the Allen Academy as well. And then Lisa Stortz is going to be moderating the hour. You heard her a lot in the beginning here, and she's one of our solutions architects and strategic relationship managers. So happy to have you all here. I'm going to quit rambling and turn it over to them. And
thanks so much, Carrie. And we're super excited to have everyone here. Please keep the chat window going as actively as you can. We have quite a few people monitoring it. As I mentioned earlier, and I'll mention several times, here at Allen, the learning never stops. So we're very fortunate we're spending the next 55 minutes or so together, but it just doesn't stop from here. You'll have all our contact information after this. Reach out anytime. Many of us are working pretty much around the clock, helping friends and family and colleagues and everyone get things online. So it's a new world, and we're all here to help each other through it. So Ethan and Ellen, why don't we kick it off with that? As we're looking to bring everything online, it seems like we've heard more clients say that, I don't know, they just went and bought a Zoom license and said, put everything online. So can you kind of walk us through a little bit about the various ways to bring things online?
Sure. This isn't a brand new thing, going online, but it's something we've all heard about for years, and we've sort of been, many organizations have been moving to online training where it's web facilitated. But now we're all in a situation where we're having, many of us who have been thinking about it are being thrown into the deep water immediately. And so, there are several absolute ways of thinking about this. Most primitive is just, feeding out webinar information that's sort of more informational. That doesn't a very good replacement for classroom training, because I think that some of the very primitive platforms and sort of the simplistic ways that people go about just taking a existing PowerPoint and feeding it out, or even just recording it and having people take it at their own time, really only satisfies the need to have, say, got the information out. What's more interesting is using the more interactive platforms, and we'll be talking about that more in the rest of the session, but where you can have fuller engagement. There's a Zoom category that you can make more interactive than we have right now in this webinar, and there's a lot of platforms, and Ellen can fill a lot on that as well. And then there's deciding, do we move to e-learning altogether? And these definitions are very shifting, but in our world, we sort of tend to think that virtual instructor-led training is something where people are online and connecting sort of directly, and the technology is used to facilitate that connection. E-learning is, in general, we view that more as asynchronous, individualized, where you create a standalone module of some sorts that someone can go in and work completely independently. There's more interactivity or individualization that you can do that way. There's a cost in that it takes time and a lot more investment than getting virtual instructor-led training up going. So it's sort of that continuum that we're all facing. Where do we need to go next? Ellen, what can you add to that overview of the situation?
Yeah, I think I think you described the different categories that we have up on screen really well. I saw a couple people ask about the virtual meetings and the difference between kind of a webinar format versus a ILT format. And going back to what you were saying, Ethan, I think it really is the differentiation is down to, what do you want the learning experience to be, And what kind of involvement and relationships are you creating between the person who is facilitating the meeting or someone, people who are participating? So I'd add a fourth category here, and that would just be virtual meeting. I'm sure a lot of people have been involved in those, regardless of whether your day-to-day training responsibilities are done virtually or have been in the past. A virtual meeting, if you think about that, the relationships between the facilitator or the host and the participant is fairly equal, right? You're getting together to have a conversation, hopefully to achieve some outcome with an agenda item. It's not really instruction, right? That's part of work. When we think about instruction, we're thinking about, webinars, the ILT, or potentially e-learning. I saw someone ask if I could speak up. I'll lean forward to my mic a little bit. So a webinar is kind of the format we're doing right now, where we have one or more experts who are kind of conveying information. We're trying to make it more of a roundtable, more of a conversation. Virtual instructor-led training, I feel, is when you're really trying to capture and recreate the dynamics of an active learning classroom. You're trying to create interactions between the learners. You're trying to give them opportunities to explore and experiment on their own. And e-learning is, you're sending a learner to go complete something that's generally designed to be done asynchronously. They're doing it on their own, and they might be coming back to an experience like a VILT or to a forum or something to share something that they took away from that e-learning experience, but it's asynchronous and it's more individualized. So I think just using some different language for my take on it, but that's kind of how I think about the three that we have on screen here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. We're getting a lot of really good questions in the back channel too, to the ones we get to today. And if not, we will follow up with them directly. One is on the conversion of the time frame of generally what it takes if you're taking a classroom into a VILT situation or into a fully online. Ellen and Ethan, you want to address that?
Well, it's such an important question, and one for which there isn't a single answer. So we can give you sort of some general ideas. Transferring a instructor-led class into a virtual class, the length of that depends a lot on how transferable the activities that you already are doing well in your class can be transferred into a virtual class. If they require a lot of physical movement and physical interaction and manipulation of things, those are going to be a little bit harder to try to recreate directly. If it's much more, you can do role plays and discussions and different ways to engage questions, those can go a lot, you can transfer that a lot quicker, and it's more of an issue of how well you can prepare yourself as an instructor to manage a class in a very different dynamic. If you do really need to rethink the activities so that they are deliverable and engageable and interesting, given that people are no longer going to be physically together, that could create a little bit more need. But I think it's a matter of, you could do it in a matter of days, you could do it in a matter of weeks, or if you're really elaborate, wanting to make sure that you are capitalizing on every last feature of what can be happening online, then it may take longer. I think we're in a situation right now that we need to have sort of the immediate quick switch, and then over time be enhancing that.
Great. And will you guys comment a little bit? I mean, when you even think of the basics, like your space for you as the facilitator, because obviously it's key, you're comfortable in your setup. So you as your space, and then you as skills you may need to hone up on in order to conduct these.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we had pre-thought out and we had organized this was, one was organizing your space. And Ellen, you had some really good ideas, I think, that you wanted to share about some of those things you might not think of that will make a big difference.
Sure. Yeah, well, it's interesting because I've seen some of the chat kind of go by and have people talking about how that in-person connection is really important to keep people engaged. And that's something that as a facilitator or as an instructor, as you practice that, as you practice your teaching and your instruction, you figure out what works for you. You know that you have to have a good volume of your voice. You know that there's pacing and distance that you have to monitor as you're moving around the learning space. And those concepts are all present when you're doing virtual instructor-led training. It's just the exact things that you need to do to set yourself up for success are a little bit different. So for example, we're talking about how your voice carries in the classroom. Well, you have to be considerate of how your voice carries virtually as well. It just means you're doing it a bit differently. So you're testing your mic ahead of time. You're viewing the chat and seeing if people are hearing you okay. When you're going in front of a classroom, you're going to look at yourself in front of the mirror before you walk out the door and you say, okay, is my attire comfortable, professional? Is it going to be distracting? Does it have my personality? But, you know, does it look like something I'd wear to the Renaissance Festival? You're asking yourself those questions. And those are all the same questions that you need to be asking yourself when you're teaching in a virtual space. So to give a personal example, I have this screen behind me. You can see there are lots of different options for what you can do to kind of set up the background of your webcam. And I do recommend webcams because it makes you feel like a human as opposed to just a string of letters on the screen. But there are options like in Zoom, you can do a virtual background. This one, I just have a messy office behind this, and I didn't want to have that on screen because I thought it would be distracting. Plus, there's a chair that the dogs always sit in. And every time a dog crawls up on that chair, I get distracted myself and I go, oh, there's a dog. That's right. There's a dog in my office. So I put this screen up. It was $25 and I got it on Craigslist just to kind of manage that space in a more professional way. And I think it's working okay. Feel free to let me know if it's not. Haven't seen a dog yet.
I want to jump onto your comment about, you know, we care about what we look like when we're teaching in person. And I think there's a tendency, and it's a joke, you know, I can teach in my pajamas and everything. And you know, you need to do whatever will make you comfortable and focused. But, you know, I put on my bow tie today, which I normally do, which is partly, as Ellen said, to make sure that you are communicating who you are. I think one of the worst things that can happen when you switch to virtual training is to forget that we are all still people. And the humanity of us and our personalities are as essential for connecting and communicating as anything you're going to do in your PowerPoint. And you may wonder, well, what does it matter? Nobody's going to see you if you're not using video. I want to share a real quick story that, you know, back in the 20s when Flo Ziegfeld would have these huge reviews on Broadway, and he had 30 or 40 dancing girls. And he insisted on getting the most luxurious stockings and lingerie for those dancing girls to wear in the shows. And a lot of his producers would complain and say, well, why are we wasting all this money on that? No one's gonna know that those stockings are silk. And he said, yes, but those dancers will know. And it does impact how you perceive yourself as well as how you present yourself. And so don't take this as permission to just become a slob. You know, that the best online classes I've had have continued to be conducted with that level of respect and interest in how you're presenting yourself.
And most importantly, if you're not used to having your webcam on, make sure that you're fully dressed when you do turn your webcam on. That's prone to happen. Okay, why don't we move on to the content? Like, how do you prepare all of the content? Let's say maybe a VILT situation. There's a lot of people in the back channel asking if I'm taking a full day session and I only have 2 hours to do it online. What's the best way to approach the content and prepare the activities?
I can take a quick stab at that. And I know, Ethan, we talked about this extensively before this webinar, so I know you have a lot to add on this. But I think the initial temptation, because of how constrained everyone probably is around timelines, is to just do kind of a one-for-one transition. You have your classroom plan that you've done in person, face-to-face, and you're going to turn on the webcam and you're going to take people through it and you're going to do the best that you can. And that's fine. What you probably want to move towards, though, is something that's a little bit more deliberately broken out. so that you are kind of interspersing, if you have a very kind of presentation focused or presentation heavy classroom experience, you want to break that up so that you have your presentation is really interspersed with interactivity. And I think that's kind of a best practice no matter what, what format you're in. But it's, I think, especially important when you're all distributed. In a classroom, if someone brings up, okay, Melissa says, tip your camera down a bit because my name is across my chin. Is that better? There we go. Okay. So in a classroom, if someone says, I have this question, can we delve into that? You can quickly respond, and you can, on the fly, you can reconfigure the classroom. You can move people around. You could ask people to pair up. It takes a little bit more doing in a virtual format to achieve the same results in a virtual classroom. So those things are ones you want to plan out a little bit more, and think through how you're going to help your learners transition into those different configurations virtually. Because technology, it takes a little more learning. It takes a little bit more hands-on attention than just standing up and walking to the other side of the room. But you can still achieve those same kind of pairing results, the same kind of group activities with the technology that's available. Thanks,
Yeah.
Gail. Thank you. She comments on my classes.
I think maybe part of the root of your question was, time savings, and if we have a full day class, how can that become a 2-hour, a much shorter thing? My experience, it's hard to achieve much reduction in time simply moving from instructor-led to virtual. As Ellen said, the mechanics of doing things are actually a little bit more cumbersome, even that just getting things taken care of and instructions out. And so you're not going to, without cutting a lot of content, I don't think you're going to see a huge reduction. With e-learning, on the other hand, typically because you no longer have a group environment, you can shortcut so many things, you do really get, almost a 60% reduction on average in the amount of seat time. But I think what you'd want to do is reduce, as Ellen said, not say, okay, we had an 8-hour class in person, I'm going to have an 8-hour ILT session, is maybe have a 2-hour session and then have individual assignments that people do not online, they do on their own time. And then you would regroup again and you'd share results and so forth. And so your actual online time might be 4 or 6 hours instead of 8, but there would be independent time that people would be doing on their own time between those sessions.
Perfect. Yeah. And Ethan and Ellen, you want to address how CCAF, if people aren't familiar with it, how it may help them focus on what's most important to bring up in the segment?
Sure. CCAF is our instructional interactivity model that we try to employ all the time. And it says any learning activity, it has to have a meaningful context, a challenge that is personal, some actions that reflect real world choices and decisions, and feedback that is where much of the teaching takes place. And so we still want to try to do that online as much. And so that's sort of why we're advocates for not being confined to whatever webinar platform you're using, because it's very hard to establish context within that. The context is we're in this remote class. And so creating assignments where people are going to be doing a virtual role play where they're talking to people or going out into their work environment, finding stuff. One of the things I like to do is create field trips or excursion assignments where, maybe we talk about something and then your assignment before the next session is go out and capture on your phone some pictures of maybe violations of our health or safety policy. Things like that to make sure that people are taking what you're talking about and going and applying in the real world context. Because it's very hard to do that when someone is sitting bound to the computer screen. But always think of those interactions as CCAF.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions too on some of the activities in the back channel. We're talking a lot about the go-do activities, you know, any of the space learning that you've been talking about a little bit. And then also office hours, how that may play into helping on the chunking and sequencing and spacing the learning.
Yeah, well, you want to make sure that you are creating support time so that there are ways for people to contact you in a very regular way, that they can get assistance outside of the time in the session. You know, one other thing about setting up the space was, you know, or the mechanics of this is, if at all you can get any kind of an assistant to help track the chat, you know, because as Ellen and I are talking, there are things that happen in chat that I can't process. And it's terrible to have things lost. And so what's a really good practice is have somebody there who's really tracking that channel and lifting up questions, as Lisa is during it. And also that provides a record that can come back and either feed office hours or have a direct response to questions that then get answered. But another thing that has about the classroom and activity is, I sort of poo-pooed the engagement online, but I want to make sure that you're aware and you need to make sure that you're aware and make full use of the extra things that you can do that you may not be used to, because the annotation tools that are available that allow everybody to, you know, highlight things or add comment, or we're going to do something like that, I think, in a moment, is essential for breaking out of sort of these trite ways that I think people interact primitively. You know, and you can put polls and you can put multiple choice questions up that people can answer, but in my experience, they tend to be a little bit distancing, and people they answer them cavalierly or easily. Whereas if you can create an activity that you have to have intention and meaning in how you do this. For instance, we'd have a diagram, and then you would have to take your marker and circle places that are infringements on information security or something. Those are ways that you could, that is new to us, and actually is something you don't have in an instructor-led environment. And so you want to take advantage of those. Also, breakout rooms. It's an important feature that you can put your learners into smaller groups. They have their own whiteboards, they have their own management. They can solve or discuss a problem, and then you can come back together and share the various things that have happened. And so that is all very possible, and it's important to employ those almost every session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Perfect.
I totally.
What about, oh, go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I totally agree. I was thinking about, you know, some of the challenges of doing kind of breakout sessions and doing kind of periods of self-directed work interspersed with periods where the whole group comes back together, which is super common if you're doing a, you know, classroom training. One of the things that I have found works well in doing something like that in a small group. We have a study group that the instructional designers at Allen Interactions, the learning experience designers, have about once a week, and we get together and we follow along with whatever we're studying, whether it's a class. Hopefully we can expand that to other areas as well. But what we do, if we all happen to be remote, is we just put everyone on mute and we share a screen with a timer on it. And we say, okay, we're all coming back together in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or something like that. And so it's a really easy to set up activity, creates a little bit of pressure to make sure that people are still focused on the activity at hand. They're not multitasking because they have that little bit of time pressure. They have to complete something and achieve something in that limited amount of time. It's a really simple way to create kind of a breakout room feeling in a very informal and kind of low-tech way. All you need is an app that allows you to meet with people and share your screen. One thing that can be more helpful if you have a larger group, and I think I saw a question about this come through. There are, you know, I think most webinar or VILT software, I think Zoom might allow for this, but I'm pretty sure that GoToWebinar might as well. I think there are already some recommendations in the chat, but yeah, you can do breakout rooms in your virtual classroom. So the applications typically allow for you to do that. Now, the way that it'll exactly work and the steps you'll have to take will be different for the software you have, but that's a feature that many virtual training platforms do allow and do offer. So explore that. If you have 30 learners and you want them to break into groups of 5, there's usually a way to do that.
One other thing that's important to consider when we're to make full use of these is recognizing that this is new to people, but the way that it works well is if people feel comfortable and familiar. And so I think it's important, if you want to use these, is to dedicate some time before you actually start into content to just play around with these things, making sure that people are fully capable of using the annotations, have games moving in and out of breakout groups. You could even, so that people do this, and so that when you finally are there to do it for real, it isn't like, okay, now we have to break and stop and talk for 15 minutes and make sure that people get into breakout rooms. That I think in our urgency to get going, I think everybody knows how you work in an instructor-led classroom. We need to make sure that everybody knows how you do all the things we're going to expect them to do in a virtual classroom. And so don't skip that step, and doing fun things like even, and this relates to another thing, is that people can hide. And so you want to work against the anonymity of the participants, especially if you have people that aren't working together usually, and some training groups are, across the whole country, some are within your own group. But if people are new to each other, make sure you have a chance for them to interact, and even have one of those bingo games where you collect characteristics and they have to talk to people through chat and different things to make sure that they know who people are. And once you're connected, you're going to get a lot more authentic and engaged participation if you make sure that people care up front. And I think that's one of the biggest failures of VILT I've seen, is that it works. Yeah.
And Ethan, I know when you talk about online learning in general and VILT included, and making it irresistible, right? You've got that. He has an amazing session. I'm sure we can post it on irresistible, making things irresistible. What can they do, some of the things in the VILT to make it irresistible? And a coupling question with that too is a lot of people are asking the best way to conduct role plays.
Well, in that regard, I think it's just understanding what you communicate that engages people. I mean, for some people, it's personality. For some people, it's a really important view of the content. For some people, it's the group experience. And every classroom is a little bit different. And so you want to take what is working and just try to figure out how that can translate. But I think it really is, for me, it's making sure that we're still people talking to each other. And that's the main thing that creates that connection. If it's something brand new to you, or if you don't have teachers who are actually successful at that now, I mean, because there's some really bad instructor-led training that now we're trying to put online. It's not going to get any better if we don't really think about what are the strategies that are going to connect people. How do we engage them? And it's not talking at people all the time. It's getting them doing things.
I think
perfect.
Can I add just briefly something that's, I think, more on the technical side to that piece? I think someone mentioned not to assume that your learners, your participants, are super comfortable with the platform, which might seem obvious, right? Especially if we ourselves are new to the platform. But there are, I think, a couple ways to balance that. One, I think you want to practice, just like you would practice a complex activity in a classroom, kind of in a casual or lighthearted way before you ask people to engage in that complex activity with the heavier content. You might practice, using the technology to get people used to the features before you ask them to engage with those features alongside the learning content. And we hopefully will have a chance to do that today a little bit with our annotation tools. The other thing I would say is, if you yourself are fairly new to the platform that you're using for online education or training, push yourself to try new features every few days. You've got to get going. I understand, you're being thrown into the deep end and you're being told to swim. But push yourself a little bit to go, further away from the walls of the side of the pool, if you will. And you'll find features in your platform that will allow you to replicate some things that you were used to doing in your face-to-face training. So, and you'll get creative. Then, the more you push yourself to explore the limits of the platform, the more you'll be able to draw from your knowledge to be creative about how to organize your classroom experience. Now, that's a lot. I think it's a lot to ask when you have a whole bunch of content that you might need to reorganize and rethink. But pushing yourself in your knowledge of the platform will actually be helpful for how you rethink your content to be better online, if that makes sense.
Good, and a great question's coming in. Instead of our live in-person conferences, we're now tasked to run a 2-hour and 4-hour technical boot camps to 100+ customers via WebEx with a hands-on lab. Any suggestions? Anyone done this before? Bueller?
Sorry, Lisa, could you repeat that question one more time?
Sure. It sounds like someone's they're taking their what was conferences for technical training, and I'm sure everybody can relate to conferences in general. But for conferences for technical training, they're now supposed to be putting them in WebExes in 2 to 4 hour sessions with some kind of live lab component. Any ideas for how to do that? And we can couple that too with thinking about what they can do before, during, and after the event to more to perhaps Prochaska's change model.
Well, I mean, it's sort of, labs can be much of a lot of things. We used to do this back when I was in college, and I think we can certainly translate. If it's a technical lab where you're actually physically having to do some work, do it like a cooking class. Get your lab, get your webcam, and you can lead through demonstrations. And if it's a situation where people could be following along doing it on their own, it could be set up that way, or you could then have another assignment that people do on their own after the demonstration and report back in some way. But the webcam, the virtual classroom doesn't just have to be a PowerPoint or looking at your head. A different lab setup could be actually seeing a whole operation take place and demonstrating that. If it's much more like software sort of labs where you're trying to show technical processes, and then I think you're much more, you can do things where people can follow along, but I think that's more of a situation where setting up almost give the demonstration, I'm gonna have a scavenger hunt of sorts that people can go and find the things on the live system that would represent that they have been able to process those new processes. Those are just a couple ideas out of the blue, not being sure at all what kind of lab situation you're talking about. But I think it's just an issue.
We're getting a good question. We want to make sure we're not misrepresenting that this is just ILT to VILT. Can you guys address just any kind of assets they may have, just bringing them online digitally somehow in various formats? Any quick tips? What should they do first? How to prioritize different things like that, so we cover a little broader than just VILT.
You want to go, Ellen? Or?
Yeah, I can jump in and kind of frame that up. So when I think of, when I'm thinking of digital delivery, and I think this is something we touched on early on in the presentation about kind of the different forms of digital delivery of learning. We think of webinar, which is more like this format. We think of VILT, which is a much smaller group. You're kind of recreating a classroom experience. And we also talked about e-learning, and we framed that kind of as self-driven asynchronous modules that engage people around a performance potentially. But there's a lot more. When we think about all the virtual tools that are available to us to help us connect with one another, we can use any of those for learning purposes. So I think, at least in the corporate environment, when you're looking at e-learning, I think you're going to find few organizations only do asynchronous modules around performance. It's part of a whole ecosystem. A whole ecosystem of learning environments. And some of those might be webinars, some of those might be virtual classrooms, some of those might be face-to-face classrooms, some of those might be e-learning modules, but you also will have, a knowledge base. You'll also have forums. You'll also have something like a chat app, like Slack, where you can connect with people and share knowledge in between those formal learning events. So I think as you're thinking about taking what might be primarily face-to-face instruction and really migrating it to digital, you might start with one thing because you have to start somewhere. And so you might start by just taking that and putting it into a virtual instructor-led training, or you might start it by doing something even simpler and just do it as a webinar that you've broken up into smaller sections. But try to expand it and see where you might be able to, for example, say, okay, we're going to do this. Instead of doing this as a 4-hour webinar, we're going to be doing this as a 60-minute VILT. And then we're going to have you do this e-learning module. You're going to have people watch these videos. You're going to have people do some reading, and then they're going to get on Slack and they're going to post, answers to questions. So you don't have to necessarily take your content and deliver it all through one platform. Try to generate an ecosystem that lets you engage people with the material more broadly. And I think that's the answer I would give based on what that question sparked in my mind, Lisa. Ethan, did you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, no, that's great. But also there are other things that are more primitive that we need not abandon. Interactive PDFs are a quick way that you might engage people in something that you don't have the time to do the webinar and the mechanics of getting people together, but you could take some of your existing material and convert it in that way and have some minimal sort of engagement with it that you can track, but it would be something that can be delivered online in this time that isn't, that could have real meaning. And you might have a really great set of job aids that you could create as electronic PDFs and then distribute those as a way to do self-study, and give some assignments around those that physically use these when you're doing that task. And that's another way of sort of studying on your own. And don't forget, YouTube and other video sources are an amazing way to create more content. And I mean, I'm surprised because I was a doubter earlier, but it's amazing how effective a short video going to YouTube. And if you do some research, I'm sure you'll find YouTube videos that are related to the content that you are trying to solve. And integrating that, just serving it out, sending emails with here's a link that this is something you can take right now to help solve that. Those are all sorts of very quick hits that you can be getting training to people almost immediately.
And you brought up too earlier that, at the end of the day, it's about the connection, and these are humans at the other end and we're dealing with, and we're all struggling, right? We're all doing the best we can. So we need to cut each other a little slack. I think whatever they can do to make it compelling and get scenarios and get the drama and intrigue right out of the gate so people kind of know what's in it for them, far beyond objectives. But make it, if there's any way you could tee up a scenario with the dramatic. I know, Ethan, you use a lot of the drama and intrigue and any of your acting skills in some of the designs that you do.
The other thing that's really very useful, and you can do this just even in the most basic of meeting platforms, is turn the tables and challenge the learners to come up with a scenario that they are troubled with. And then you could run a role plays around that, or that they have a solution. This is a great way to include them as part of the source of expertise. Many of our students are not uninformed or skilled. And it's hard to do this in a classroom sort of, but it's really an ideal time to turn over the reins that, for the next 20 minutes, this person's going to give us a presentation on this topic. And it really, people feel great about that. And it brings more information in, it mixes up the way that people are engaged, and it addresses real problems.
Yeah, I think about 20 minutes ago, we were talking about teachbacks in the chat channel. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, Ethan. Share the stage, as it were.
Yeah.
This might be going a little bit in reverse, kind of going back to the set up your teaching space. But all these things are connected. The virtual experience is going to inform the way that you organize content. The virtual tools you have available to you are going to inform how you organize the content and your students. But one thing that one of my teaching friends reminded me of earlier today was that you're going to, especially if you're in an educational environment, but probably no matter what your organization is, double check your organization's policy on webcam use. And the reason he brought this up to me was because they aren't going to allow their students to use webcams. So they're currently transitioning to ILT because everyone's from home. And that's the way that they're going to currently, at least at first, try to continue the educational experience for their students. But they won't be able to have students turn their webcams on. And I think that really has an impact on the learning experience. I understand why that policy is in place. They don't want to deal with having to coach hundreds and thousands of students potentially on what should be in the background of their learning space. And sometimes students won't have control of that. Plus, these are minors. He's a secondary education teacher. So, but it has a lot of impact on what the learning experience is, because you're going to be missing some of that interpersonal connection during the session. It's going to be just him and his face if he's showing his webcam, and then his students are not going to have their live faces. So even that one policy has a big impact on what the learning experience will be in those sessions. He's going to have to plan around that.
Hey, Greg commented on learner-centric, what a concept. And I know we spend a lot of time at Allen focusing on learner-centric versus company-centric. Ethan, you want to kind of just give a quick recap of some of the benefits of learner-centric versus company-centric?
Yeah, well, the big idea is that training works best when it's driven by the learners doing things and pulling content as needed, as opposed to what's much more traditional, which is content-centered, which is, I'm just going to tell you all of this, regardless of whether you need it. And that certainly is a principle that applies very, very specifically to e-learning. It really applies to everything, but the habits of instructor-led training are so deep that people resist the idea of lecturing. But I think it is an opportunity that we really should take on. And one of the things is, don't put, give yourself a goal of not putting words or maybe just a single phrase on your PowerPoints. If you're going to deliver a lot of content, put it in a participant guide that people can download and they have handy to look at. But it kills interaction if your goal is to read content. And so support with images, either humorous or relevant or real or pretty, whatever. But those things, the words distract from the communication going on. And so you do want to change the way you create your presentations. And this is true even if you go back to ILT, because most instructor-led training presentations are really poor for learning. But so that's what learner-centered design is. And instead of spending most of your time delivering, spend most of your time challenging the learner to respond to an unsolved problem or a predicament or something they need practice on, getting people in these breakout rooms to do a role play and then say, what did you learn about that? Yeah, we learned, you should listen attentively, rather than saying up front, a good person listens attentively, which doesn't mean much. But once you've experienced it and had the frustration of not communicating well with somebody, then you can talk about, well, this is a really great skill that effective communicators use. And so just turn that whole thing into having much more what we call test and tell. It doesn't have to be a test, but it's get the person doing something and then use that as a catalyst to have a good conversation about whatever that you want to expand.
Right. You're not delivering, you're creating dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just a side note on that too, that I heard both of you talk about it quite a bit. There's so many benefits for companies bringing everything online, right? 24/7, it's global, it meets the learner where they're at, the whole piece. But the benefits for the learner, this is such a great time to capitalize on that. It's such a safe environment for people, right? They can be with themselves and their meditative space and their computer. So we want to make sure we really, again, focus back to that human element.
Absolutely.
Cool. We have a lot of other great questions coming in, a lot on the formats of different pieces, a lot of great different resources. People have been asking if we're going to be sharing the whole back channel with everyone. We absolutely can. There's great resources. And that was the whole point of this, right, is that we're just better together. And again, I want to reinforce we're here long after this webinar to help with anything. Here's a question. I want to know if we're offering any consulting at the end of this, if they can reach out to Lisa, Ethan, or Ellen. Absolutely, no problem. We have plenty of colleagues willing to help. We're all helping teacher friends and neighbors and all kinds of things. So we're absolutely happy to help all of you. Ethan and Ellen, what other comments would you like to make sure we're covering?
Oh gosh, you can just keep going with this forever.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back on the ideas I had if we covered all the main points that I was hoping that we could share. This probably comes in the category of my cynicism, but one thing you do want to just figure out is, it's terrible to say, but how much do you care? Because there are a lot of organizations that I work with and have similar conversations with virtual learning and with e-learning. And oftentimes they say, well, our legal department, we can't do that. Our standards make that impossible. Or, well, I'm sorry, we only have a week to invest. Well, and those are value judgments. And those are things you can choose to try to affect change in or not. But if our goal is really changing the performance of our learners and creating dynamic and memorable and meaningful, engaging learning experiences, we can't be too quick to accept what principles have been set in a different setting. And so some of the rules that have been set for classroom training, you want to think about them before you automatically just say, okay, those are the exact same rules that we're going to apply now. And it could be any number of things, but I just encourage you to not be too complacent in accepting everything that the man has laid on us. Just because there's a favorite hymn of mine, has a phrase, new occasions teach new duties. And we're in a new occasion. And the next phrase is, time makes ancient good uncouth, which is a very florid way of saying, as times change, what was really good before may not be the right thing right now. And so I just want to encourage you to think, what does this new occasion teach us in terms of how we need to start changing? So that, again, the result always is, what do learners get out of the situation?
I really like those words, Ethan. I'm a word junkie. I will have to remember that.
I know, I noted that with you too. I love it. I think at Allen too, what I love about the times we're in right now is, our mission has always been enhancing the human mind and spirit, right? We could have ended at mind, but there's just so much more to it. And I think this new online environment gives us an opportunity to really connect with people, the full mind and spirit, and as Ethan mentioned, it's at the end of the day, if we can make it meaningful, memorable, or motivational, we're for that. So Ellen, thoughts?
Yeah, I saw one comment kind of fly by saying that we hadn't yet done the polls or the annotation section, and I know we have only a few minutes left, and probably some people are jumping off, getting ready for their next meeting. But I thought maybe for the last couple of minutes we could give that a try and coach people through it, especially for those who have never done it before.
Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully everyone on screen or everyone online can see the screen where it says annotation, a fun alternative to polls. And I think this is a good thing just to kind of get a temperature check for those of you who are on the line. We have a continuum here. On the left side of the continuum, we are answering the question, how experienced are you with conducting the ILT? So this is virtual instructor-led training. not a webinar, not e-learning, but how experienced are you in doing training in a virtual space? So you have on the very left side of the continuum, I've never tried it. I've always done face-to-face. You have in the middle of the continuum, I have some experience, but it's not really extensive, or maybe not very recent. And then on the right side of the continuum, you're a pro, you've got this, you have extensive and recent experience. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is look to their Zoom webinar interface, and you should at some point find a view options dropdown. When you click that view options dropdown, you're going to see something that says annotate. When you click that, it's going to bring up another submenu, and I will try to kind of follow along with everybody here. Is everyone seeing that? Just want to see responses in chat if you're able to find that view options. Okay, I'm seeing lots of no's. Okay.
It's up at the top, at least on mine. It's by the thing saying that Carrie is sharing her screen.
Not an option. Okay, maybe that we don't have access to those in our webinar. What I can show is what that looks like from a user perspective. What you can do in this particular session, oh, I'm seeing a few. It looks like some people are seeing it.
That's me.
Okay, got it. So the way that you can do this, and I'll ask our panelists then to kind of demonstrate this, is you can ask people to use stamps and to indicate where they are on a continuum or on a grid, just to kind of get a really brief look at responses to a question. So instead of using something like a traditional poll question, which, as Ethan mentioned early on, can be a little off-putting and maybe too formal, you can do this as a facilitator to get people to respond in a little bit more of a fun and spontaneous way. Now, one problem with this is you can add more than one stamp. So you can see I am adding a ton of hearts. But whatever tool that you're using, look to find these kinds of alternatives to something that's maybe the default choice. Zoom webinar has options where you can do polls. But if you don't want to have something that's so formal, if you want to do something of a different take, all you need to do this is an annotate tool and a slide, and people can interact with it in that way.
Thank you, Ellen. That's great. It's funny too, as we prepared for this today, we made sure we carried the theme for ourselves and others. You know, it's a time for compassion and to really cut each other a little slack on everything we're all trying to learn together and do together. So appreciate that. And that was a good example too. We know we need to, you know, the tools and how we can share those. And we're happy to get more information out on that. There's lots of tools flowing through the back channel, which are all great. We'll make sure to include all of those in the piece. We have about 4 minutes left. Ellen and Ethan, any final comments?
Mainly, just don't be afraid. You are all really competent, and you have teaching experience, and don't feel like that isn't vital to carry forward. And don't think that the tools are going to somehow destroy the event. They're a tool for you to use, and keep yourself present and keep your own connection with your learners paramount. And I think you'll find that it's not so terrible, and be ready to shift. See what works, see what doesn't work, what works for you, and just be very flexible, trying to master a new way of connecting.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that, Ethan, is, you know, this is an opportunity for leadership, right? If you are someone who's helping a group or an organization migrate to a different method of delivery, where maybe you were more analog before, now you're moving more to something that's digitally dependent, there's a lot of concern, right? We're all concerned about the current state of things. Things are changing for everyone. Our jobs are changing. Expectations around what we have to do every day are changing. But if you're leading an effort, or if you are moving into instruction on your own, you're in a leadership position, and you can help convey that culture of figuring it out together. You know, that mindset. That's one of the things you can do. And I think no matter, you know, what tools are available to you or where your abilities lie in terms of that continuum we looked at, approaching changes with that mentality is going to bring people with you, instead of, they won't resist, it'll bring camaraderie and it'll bring people with you instead of creating resistance and fear. And I think that's really important at this point in time.
Absolutely. And one thing I'm using with all my client calls and other consulting calls I'm on, trying to just help people upskill in the online environment, is more than ever, just do a quick round robin check-in with people when you're joining, right? Just, how are you? Let them just let it out, let it lie, and then so we can move on with whatever the topic at hand is for that short duration. Because we really just have to, people have, they're trying to balance their kids and their worries and their fears and everything else. So just, give them an opportunity, quick round robin, to just let us know where they're at and how they're thinking and showing up to that session, and then take it from there.
Yeah.
I'm actually hosting my book club online tonight, so we'll see how that goes. It's
and one thing I'd add to that is, one thing I'd add, Lisa, is that there's a tendency to assume that it's negative. We can set a positive expectation and not actually go in all the time unless we're aware of it, saying, what's the problems? Talk about the opportunities, because indeed there are great opportunities, and we want to make sure that we are focusing on that. And just as a tiny little story, the class I just got finished teaching, it was completely unrelated to the course, but I was in Florida teaching and was bemoaning the fact that I was stuck in Disney World and wanted to do something more real. And one of the students said, well, go to Blue Springs and see the manatees. So I was able to do that. And that became a trigger for our conversation and talking about manatees and talking about exploring and all sorts of things that has carried us through several additional classrooms. And you want those things to happen. And that's, be open to the possibilities.
On that note, again, I want to thank everyone. I'm sure Carrie's going to do some closing comments here, but Ethan and Ellen, thank you so much. Of course, we're Allen Interactions because we love to interact with everyone and technology. So please take us seriously on reaching out. We have lots of colleagues waiting to help. So Carrie, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you guys. This was all really great. Ethan, Ellen, and Lisa's contact information is there on the screen. We'll send it out again in a follow-up email. We'll send all this information that you're asking for, chat, other resources. We're going to compile this crowdsourced checklist of best practices. We are offering complimentary consulting, as Lisa stated. So this is just more ways to connect with us that are on the screen, but we'll send those all out in the follow-up email as well. So you can go to our website. We have a chat button there. You can fill out a contact us form, call us on our 800 number. And then I just wanted to let everybody know we are holding another webinar next week on co-creating your playbook for remote work success. So that'll be next Thursday. Claire will be putting that link to that in the chat for you to register, but we'll send that along as well. So thank you all for being on. There was so much great interactivity and thoughts and ideas and questions, and we're going to get to everything, get answers for you and get back to you as soon as we can. So take care, everyone. Always try to find a bright spot in all of this. There always is one. And take care. We'll see you soon. And if you're still on, if you have any ideas for things you really want us to focus on or have webinars on, please pop those into the chat. That would be great. But I think we have a lot of great ideas even on all of the things that have been put into the chat during the hour.